Have you ever just stopped for a second to think about, well, thinking itself? How does a random idea that pops into your head turn into a real physical action, like moving your hand? Today, we're going to trace that exact path. We'll follow a single signal from a tiny spark of a thought through the massive electrical highway in your body and all the way to some seriously futuristic technology. So let's get started.
So it all boils down to this one question. It seems simple, right? But the answer is one of the most amazing processes in all of nature. How does the simple intention to move your hand actually travel from your brain down your arm and into your fingers in less than a blink of an eye? Let's unpack that piece by piece.
The answer to how we move our hand, or really how we do anything at all, starts right here. It all begins with a tiny, almost unnoticeable electrical event. You can think of it as the spark that ignites the entire network inside of us. Okay, so you've got this spark, but how does it actually get anywhere? Well, to carry that spark, the brain uses these incredibly specialized messengers. They're kind of like the biological wiring that makes up your body's very own internet. And these messengers are, of course, the famous neurons.
A neuron is the absolute fundamental building block of your nervous system. And get this, you have around 86 times billion of them in your brain alone. That forms a communication network that is just staggeringly complex. Every single neuron acts like a tiny information processor, and it's constantly listening and talking to its neighbors.
Now, what's really cool is how simple a neuron's basic structure is, especially for the complex job it has to do. On one end, you've got the dendrites. You can think of these as little antennae, always listening for signals coming in from other neurons. And on the other end, there's the axon. That's the long cable that sends the neuron's own message out. It's a pretty straightforward system for receiving and sending, just repeated 86 billion times over. So how does that signal actually shoot down the axon cable? It's through a process called an action potential. But honestly, the best way to picture it is like a line of dominoes. The dendrites get all these little signals, and if there are enough of them to hit a certain tipping point, like pushing that first domino just hard enough, it sets off this unstoppable chain reaction. A wave of electrical energy just zips down the axon at speeds of up to 268 miles per hour. And that's it. The neuron has officially fired. But here's the catch. Neurons don't actually touch each other. There's this tiny microscopic gap between them. So how does the signal make the jump? Well, this is where the magic of brain chemistry takes over. This little gap is called a synapse. It's an incredibly small space, but it's one of the most important structures in your entire body. Because it's at the synapse that the signal has to completely change its form. It goes from being an electrical impulse to a chemical message just so it can cross that tiny void. So how does it make that leap? When that electrical domino effect reaches the end of the axon, it triggers the release of these tiny chemical messengers called neurotransmitters. These chemicals just float across that synaptic gap and latch onto the dendrites of the next neuron, kind of like a key fitting perfectly into a lock. And that click is what kicks off a brand new electrical signal in the next cell. So it goes from electrical to chemical and right back to electrical. It's amazing. And this is where the brain's decision-making really happens, down at this micro level. See, not all of these chemical messages are the same. Some are excitatory. They're basically a go signal that encourages the next neuron to fire. But others are inhibitory. They're the stop signal. Your brain is constantly, every second, calculating the sum of all these go and stop signals to decide if a message gets to continue on its path. You know, the scale of this whole operation is it's mind-boggling. To give you some perspective, a single recent project managed to create a 3D map of about 150 million of these neural connections. Just one project. That's an almost unimaginable web of communication going on inside your head. But the key thing to remember is this web isn't random chaos. It's a highly structured system. Which brings us to the superhighways that these connections form. It's time to zoom out a bit and look at the bigger picture, the entire nervous system. Okay, so the nervous system is basically split into two main parts. First, you have the central nervous system, or the CNS. That's the brain and the spinal cord. Think of it as your body's command center, where all the big information processing happens. Then you have the peripheral nervous system, or PNS, which is basically all the other nerves branching out, relaying messages between that command center and the rest of your body. Now, within that peripheral system, there's a division that works totally on its own, without you even thinking about it. And a great way to understand it is to think of a car. The sympathetic system is the gas pedal. It's what triggers that fight or flight response, getting your body all mobilized for action. The parasympathetic system, on the other hand, is the brake. It activates the rest and digest mode, calming your body down to save energy. It's this beautiful balance between the two that keeps you running smoothly.
All right, so we've just decoded the brain's basic language. It's a language of electrical sparks and chemical handshakes. And now, for the first time in human history, we're not just listening to this language anymore, we're actually learning how to speak it ourselves. We're building a bridge between our minds and our machines.
This is done through something called a brain-computer interface, or BCI. At its core, a BCI is really just a translator. It measures the electrical activity of your neurons, those exact signals we've been talking about, and it converts those patterns into commands that a computer or even a robotic arm can understand. It literally translates your thoughts into action.
The whole process works in this simple but really powerful feedback loop. First, electrodes pick up the brain's electrical signals. Second, some very powerful algorithms decode those signals, trying to figure out what you intend to do. Third, that intention is executed as a command. And finally, and this is the most important part, the user gets feedback. They see the cursor move or the arm grasp something, and they can adjust their thoughts, creating this closed loop that gets more and more accurate over time.
And let me be clear, this is not science fiction anymore. This is happening right now. A groundbreaking study, for instance, successfully used a BCI to decode the inner dialogue of a person with paralysis. It allowed them to communicate with an incredible 79% accuracy. This isn't just theory. This technology is already changing people's lives. So, let's bring this all back together. We've gone from a single spark to a network of billions of connections, all the way to a technology that can actually read our minds. It's been an extraordinary journey. We've seen how a thought begins as an electrical pulse, becomes a chemical signal to jump the synapse, travels all through the central and peripheral nervous systems, and now can even be interpreted by a computer. It's this incredible cascade of events that makes your brain, without a doubt, the most sophisticated communication device on the entire planet. Which leaves us with one final fascinating question to think about. For thousands of years, the brain has basically been a black box. But now, as we're finally learning to speak its native language, what new secrets is it going to tell us? What are we going to ask it to do next?